The Salem Witch Trials. The Salem Witch Trials, which took place in 1692 in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, remain one of the most notorious and tragic events in American history. These trials, fueled by fear, superstition, and religious extremism, resulted in the wrongful executions of 20 people, most of them women, and the imprisonment of over 100 others. The trials have become a symbol of mass hysteria and the dangers of scapegoating within a tight-knit community. This article will explore the historical context, the events that led to the trials themselves, and their lasting impact on American society. The Puritan worldview and the fear of witchcraft. To understand the Salem witch trials, one must first understand the mindset of the Puritans in 17th century New England. The Puritans were a deeply religious group that had left England in search of a place where they could practice their strict form of Protestantism without persecution. They believed in the constant presence of the devil and viewed the world as a battleground between good and evil. The Puritans held the Bible as the ultimate authority, and within it, witchcraft was considered a grave sin. The Old Testament book of Exodus declared, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," Exodus 22:18, providing a biblical mandate for the persecution of suspected witches. In the Puritan worldview, witches were believed to be in league with Satan, using magic to cause harm and destruction. Any misfortune, from failed crops to illness, could be interpreted as the result of witchcraft. This deeply ingrained belief in the existence of witches was coupled with the Puritans' strict social structure, in which deviation from religious or social norms could lead to suspicion or outright accusations of witchcraft. Salem Village, a community divided. By 1692, Salem was a community on edge. Salem was divided into two main areas: Salem Town, a thriving commercial center by the coast, and Salem Village, a more rural, agrarian community located several miles inland. While Salem Town enjoyed economic prosperity, many of the residents of Salem Village struggled with poverty and resented the wealth and influence of their neighbors in the town. This economic divide also reflected a religious one, as Salem Village was home to many staunch Puritans who felt that the commercial success of Salem Town was corrupting the community's religious integrity. These underlying tensions were compounded by a recent history of conflict and fear. In the preceding decades, the colony had faced constant threats from Native American tribes, many of whom were allied with the French in the ongoing wars between England and France. In addition, the colony had endured political instability due to changing relationships with the English crown. These factors combined to create a climate of fear, anxiety, and distrust within Salem Village. The spark, strange symptoms, and the first accusations. In January of 1692, the spark that ignited the Salem witch trials began in the home of Reverend Samuel Parris, the minister of Salem Village. Parris's 9-year-old daughter, Betty Parris, and her 11-year-old cousin, Abigail Williams, began experiencing strange symptoms. The girls would fall into fits, screaming uncontrollably, making strange noises, contorting their bodies into unnatural positions, and complaining of being pinched or bitten by invisible forces. The family was alarmed and quickly consulted the village doctor, William Griggs. When no physical cause could be found for the girls' afflictions, Griggs concluded that the symptoms were caused by witchcraft. The girls' bizarre behavior spread to other young women in the village, including Ann Putnam Jr. and Mercy Lewis, who also began exhibiting similar symptoms. Under pressure from adults in the community, the afflicted girls began naming those they believed to be responsible for their torments. 3 women were singled out: Tituba, an enslaved woman in the Parris household; Sarah Good, a local beggar; and Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who had not attended church for some time. These women were easy targets. Tituba was an outsider due to her race and status as an enslaved person, and both Good and Osborne were marginalized within the community due to their poverty and social standing. The spread of hysteria. The accusations against these women were just the beginning. Tituba, under intense pressure, confessed to practicing witchcraft and claimed that there were other witches in the colony. Her confession fed the growing hysteria, and soon, accusations began to spread like wildfire. The list of accused expanded to include many more people, including upstanding members of the community like Rebecca Nurse, a pious and well-respected elderly woman. The afflicted girls, whose accusations carried great weight in the trials, continued to point fingers at various individuals. Some of the accused, like Tituba, confessed to witchcraft in the hopes of escaping execution, while others maintained their innocence. The more people were accused, the more the community became gripped by fear. Neighbor turned against neighbor, and the courts began filling up with cases of witchcraft. The trials begin. In March of 1692, formal trials began for the accused witches. A special court, known as the Court of Oyer and Terminer, was established by Governor William Phipps to handle the growing number of cases. This court was presided over by judges who were eager to root out the devil's influence from Salem. The most controversial aspect of the trials was the use of spectral evidence. Spectral evidence referred to testimony that the accused spirit or specter had appeared to the witness and caused harm. For example, the afflicted girls would claim that the specter of a certain woman had attacked them, even though the woman herself was not physically present. This type of evidence was impossible to disprove and was a major factor in the conviction of many of the accused. The first person to be executed was Bridget Bishop, a woman who had previously been accused of witchcraft. On June 10, 1692, she was hanged at Gallows Hill, a barren spot on the outskirts of Salem Village. In the following months, 18 more people were hanged, and one man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death with heavy stones for refusing to enter a plea. The trials and executions were public events attended by large crowds and were meant to serve as a warning to others. However, rather than quelling the fear, the executions only deepened the hysteria. The end of the trials. As the summer of 1692 turned to fall, the Salem witch trials began to lose momentum. Some prominent members of the community, including Reverend Increase Mather, began to speak out against the use of spectral evidence. In his book, Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits, Mather argued that it was better for 10 suspected witches to go free than for one innocent person to be condemned. Other ministers in the colony also began questioning the validity of the trials, and public opinion slowly started to shift. Governor Phipps, who had been away during much of the trials, returned to Salem in October 1692 and was disturbed by what he found. His own wife had been accused of witchcraft, and the hysteria seemed to be spiraling out of control. On October 29th, Phipps ordered the Court of Oyer and Terminer to be dissolved, effectively ending the witch trials. The remaining cases were transferred to a new court, and spectral evidence was no longer admissible. By May 1693, Governor Phipps had pardoned and released all remaining prisoners who had been accused of witchcraft. The aftermath. In total, 20 people were executed during the Salem witch trials, 19 by hanging and 1 by pressing, and at least 150 others were imprisoned. The trials left a dark legacy in Salem, and in the years that followed, many of those involved began to express regret for their actions. In 1697, the Massachusetts General Court declared a day of fasting and soul-searching for the tragedy of Salem. In 1702, the trials were officially declared unlawful, and in 1711, the colony passed a bill restoring the good names of the condemned and offering financial restitution to their families. The Salem witch trials have been remembered and studied for centuries as an example of the dangers of mass hysteria, religious extremism, and the power of fear. The trials were a result of a perfect storm of social, religious, and political factors that combined to create an environment in which reason and justice were overshadowed by paranoia and superstition. The legacy of the Salem witch trials. The Salem witch trials have had a lasting impact on American culture and legal systems. They are often cited as a cautionary tale about the dangers of scapegoating, false accusations, and the breakdown of due process. The phrase witch hunt has entered the modern lexicon as a metaphor for any unjust persecution of individuals based on fear, suspicion, or paranoia. In the centuries since the trials, numerous books, plays, and films have been produced about the events of 1692, the most famous of which is Arthur Miller's 1953 play The Crucible. Written during the McCarthy era, The Crucible used the Salem witch trials as an allegory for the Red Scare and the anti-communist hysteria that gripped the United States during the 1950s. Miller's play highlighted the timeless nature of the trial's themes: fear, suspicion, and the dangers of a society turning against itself. Today, Salem, Massachusetts, is a popular tourist destination, attracting visitors with its rich colonial history and its legacy as the site of the infamous witch trials. The city is home to museums, historical sites, and memorials dedicated to the victims of the trials. The Salem Witch Museum, for example, educates visitors about the historical context of the trials and their significance. Conclusion: the Salem witch trials stand as a sobering